You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Get bellyache. I got a duty right now.
Aye, sir.
It's a perfect start.
Yeah, it is.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. I am Urza Master. With me, as always, is Lord Uther, and today joining us is Jeff Spicoli.
Hey, buds, let's party!
And we are going to party indeed. We are doing a special double episode this week. Unfortunately, last week we had some issues come up, unforeseen and uncontrollable. But I have to say this is a perfect combo doubleheader to talk because it's really a two-part episode if we think about it in Star Trek canon-esque style. Boy, howdy, a lot has happened on Picard since we left off with the Titan and the Shrike. And, I mean, I don't even know where to begin. So, in traditional Warp Core fashion, let's turn it over to Jeff Spicoli for some background, and let's set up the scene of these two monstrously great episodes.
Thank you, Ursa Master. Thank you, Lord Uther. And thanks to you at home. So, yes, we do have episodes 7 and 8, both directed by Deborah Kampmeyer, who was new to the Star Trek family, but has been an actress, a director, even an acting coach, according to her IMDb credits. These shows really do, it's actually kind of good that we're going to be discussing them in tandem, because I think some of the criticisms that could have been leveled at Episode 7, Dominion, were then answered in no small part with Episode 8. So I feel like some of that critiques have been blunted by how the writers pulled that off. It was a solo effort for Episode 7, Dominion. The name, of course, hearkening back to some of our favorite DS9 changeling conflicts in the Bermanverse. It was written by Jane Maggs. Jane is no stranger to Star Trek. She wrote or co-wrote 3 episodes of the previous season, including the solo credit for Episode 7, Monsters, in which Jean-Luc was reliving his childhood fears, and they tried to summon Q using Guinan and ended up getting arrested by the FBI. So those were her works there. She's also worked on a couple of episodes this season. This was a solo shot for Jane in Dominion. And really, to that note about some of the criticisms being, muted by the 2 episodes back to back, it's interesting in this world of streaming, in this world of choosing as a streamer to air your shows either all at once in a great big hungry binge, like Netflix is prone to do, or to parcel them out week by week. Because what I'm finding, which is fascinating, they have these things on the internet, these recaps, where they'll sit there and literally type up everything that happened on the show, just either in case you missed it, or in case you were watching it and didn't know what the heck was going on. And it's funny because by doing it week by week, they will levy observations, critiques, criticisms, things that they liked or they didn't. And then you realize 3 or 4 episodes down the road that the show's producers and writers may have already anticipated some of those critiques and criticisms. We just obviously don't know because we haven't seen them yet. And I think I'm guilty of that because one of my biggest thoughts on Episode 7 was we're spending a lot of time with Jack and Sydney in this sort of burgeoning love story, tender pangs of young love. But where is Worf and Raffi? And where is Riker and Troy? And I felt like those storylines were grievously missed in this episode, this high-fraught tension episode. Why weren't we aware of what was going on with them? Well, of course, when we discuss episode 8 in a little while, all fears are put to rest, and we do indeed pick back up our storyline. So it felt a little jarring just watching episode 7 solo, but now obviously the narrative threads have been tied and connected. And we started in Dominion with some familiar faces again. Geordi, who is thrown in his lot with the crew of the Titan on the run. He's doing a move we've seen all the way back to 1992 Sneakers, trying to throw off the Starfleet tracing of transmissions. While 7 of 9 contacts an old buddy, Tuvok, our favorite Vulcan, played by Tim Russ. Haven't seen Tuvok in a few years. But, of course, because changelings can change, we have to find out if Tuvok is indeed on the level. And so there's a tense back and forth of ask me questions that only you could know the answer to. And when Tuvok seemingly passes the test, we get this great reprise of the Voyager main title theme from Jerry Goldsmith, and the audience takes a deep cleansing breath to say, oh, it's wonderful to see him again, only to have the phasers ripped right out from underneath us when it turns out that indeed Tuvok is an imposter. And the actual Tuvok, his condition and whereabouts are parts unknown. So that was a great moment between the two former Voyager cast members, as well as unsettling the audience again, thinking, my God, this conspiracy runs so deep. And so it's a great way to start off the episode where you're on your back foot, not uncertain of who to trust and how we're going to get there. And I thought that was a really great moment there. The biggest moments, and I wanted to turn it over to you guys to talk about it, the biggest moments in both of these episodes really do involve our central core next-gen cast members. And there was nothing more powerful in episode 7 than Geordi and Data/Lore/B4 having those moments as the malignant lore programming tried to throw a spanner wrench into the Titans' plans and created a dastardly situation for Picard and them to defuse. But LeVar Burton and Brett Spiner interacting with each other, particularly LeVar Burton and Geordi, basically carrying the emotional heft of this scene, was very striking, and it really struck out. I wanted to kind of start off there with how you guys responded to that and the emotions that were coalescing. Take it away.
Well, Uther, you going to defer to me?
Always.
All right. Yeah. Yes. That is of the episode Dominion, the most poignant, I think, moment of the season thus far through episode 7 is Geordi bearing his heart and soul as to what happened after Data died. I think we all remember very well from Nemesis how we all felt. It was incomplete. It left you feeling sort of hollow as an audience, and that was really reflected in Geordi and his transformation from who he was to a better man, a better father, all these things. And I got choked up. I mean, I think as a father, and this is probably a perspective only some audience members and myself and Lord Uther can really muster, but I think the perspective of imagining that turning point, because we all have one. Every person who ends up siring children has that moment where they make the very conscious decision to be better than who they've been. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that people who don't have kids aren't good or better. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's this weird thing about having that decision, like, I'm going to settle down, I'm going to have kids, I'm going to be better than whatever I was before for these reasons, because I'm not getting better doing what I'm doing. And that's kind of what Geordi's acknowledging, is that his character, if you watch TNG, his character is fairly static in a way. He doesn't really develop as deeply as Data does. And for him to be this Commodore with 2 daughters who are very successful, it's a huge character shift. And they even kind of comment on it in the show. And this is his moment of just expressing, like, Data, you were the catalyst. And I know, personally, I had a catalyst like that as well, where I had this epiphany of, yeah, this is something I want to do. I want to get my shit together and, you know, straighten up, basically, and try and make something, because I've seen tragedy happen, and I want to do better than that tragedy. And that, it was pretty gut-wrenching, you know. I mean, it definitely made me emotional. I think the writing, again, was very impressive. I am also glad, because we're talking about this as a pseudo two-parter, I think the shortcomings of episode 7 are absolutely addressed by episode 8. And although I have some reservations, because we still have 2 full episodes left in the season, you know, they had to make some resolutions through these 2 episodes, and I think episode 7 did a really nice job of creating this cataclysmic tension, you know, the climax of the show. Although there's still quite a bit of question marks, especially through episode 7, not quite to episode 8 yet, but I think the Data lore before, you know, Dr. Sung conundrum, if you will, really puts them in a bind, because they don't know exactly what they can do to straighten this out. They know they need Data's help, and they're basically at this moment of, they have to make that same decision Geordi had to make again. What do you do? Because this partition between B4 and Data is the only thing saving Data right now. And they have the very real fear of, what if? You know, Geordi straight up says, I can't watch him die again. And I don't think the audience could either. I mean, let's be frank. We'll get to episode 8 in a bit here, but these 2 episodes did not pull any emotional punches. They certainly set, I think, as fans, both with the TNG crew and the new crew, by the way, of the Titan, they really set an emotional precedent for what they could do in a future series. And I bring that up for a couple of reasons. Now, with Tuvok guesting on episode 7, it's very prudent that we bring up that there's a lot of open doors for Star Trek in the future, whether it's another miniseries type event, 30 episodes, over 3 seasons, or a full-on long show, say 24 episodes or greater over the course of a year. We have Star Trek Legacy being teased, and I just read an article today that not just in talks, but in production, I don't know if it's pre-production or main production, but somewhere in the phase of the overarching term of production is a Star Trek Voyager revival. And now, of course, we've seen multiple Voyager characters come up, and I think that's highly intriguing. You know, obviously Jerry Ryan has a huge role on the 3 seasons of Picard, really opening that door for a franchise that I think, you know, she's brought it up before, and we talked about it, I think, last time. Voyager was her home, you know, and she's clearly without her family because they're now sort of scattered after Voyager. You know, that's where we picked up with her, was she was a Ravager, or a Ranger, sorry. And, you know, I think the internet plays a big role here. And you mentioned, Mr. Spicoli, you know, the recaps and stuff. It goes hand in hand with the fact that they probably wouldn't be making any Star Trek content unless there were extreme vocal majorities out there basically clamoring for more TNG cast. We want a real ending. Terry Matalas being one of those people. Ultimately, his goal is, you know, to take what Nemesis left behind and give him the proper Star Trek 6. Now, that being said, this is the 5th sort of film, if you will, for the TNG franchise. If you think of it as a 10-hour film, you know, that's the odd number. I mean, just throwing that out there, and that's been on the interwebs. But these recappers out there, they do a little bit of disservice to the folks that might, you know, not have the time but want to know the story and get caught up. I've read a couple of them just to sort of study up on, what other people are doing as they talk about this show, since we're a podcast that talks about Star Trek. But they don't do a good job most of the time. They ignore a lot of large details, and the ones that dive way too deep into the fine details get completely lost in what they're doing. So I would urge all of our listeners and our fan base out there to head over to digitalescapepod.com, drop us all your comments in our YouTube page, and send us your feedback through our website. Let us know, how do we do as we evaluate Star Trek Picard and all the Star Trek franchise? But we're not recapping. We're analyzing, we're offering our perspective. We're not really even offering judgment most of the time. It's not like we're talking Star Wars Episode 1, which will be another podcast for another day. But I loved it. I loved what they did with this episode, and that moment you brought up between Geordi and Data, I mean, that's everything. That was my Picard and Q of this season.
This is, so I think sometimes people would term this as a filler episode, where I think this was a perfect setup episode. It was setting everything up to definitely be concluded in the next episode, so we can get them all around the table, which is what they bring up at the very end. And I love how they're breaking the fourth wall consistently, but in a very cool way. Like, hey, everyone, this is what you wanted to see. We're gathered around the table again, right? Is it the last time? Is it going to continue? I mean, I even was feeling some of that vibe. I do like how they... See, I'm jumping ahead episodes, and you probably don't want me to do that right now. I also feel like the Titan now is very worthy of its own show. So whether they do, if they do a Voyager spinoff, obviously Jerry Ryan's going to go there. If they don't, I think they can really do something with Shaw, because he is so out, in my opinion, he's outside of the norm of our typical Star Trek captain. And that's something that I'm really liking right now. I feel like he is outside of the norm on that. Because a lot of times he's calling bullshit. He just is. And I kind of like that. I didn't like it at first. I mean, as all of our millions and millions of listeners, as they go back and they hear our previous episodes and they hear me talking about Shaw and how I didn't like him, they've written that character perfectly as well. So Paramount, beautiful. I applaud you, and I hope you continue to develop that character. I want to jump ahead. I can't help it. I'm still...
You're jumping.
I cannot pass verdict now on Jack Crusher being an all-powerful being until I figure out, I guess until the last episode, because they've done such a good job of addressing those little things where I'm like, I'm going to hate this, and they wind up completely spinning it around. Though I knew that Data was going to be, I jumped ahead. Though I knew Data was going to be okay, I still like how they did it. And I guess we can touch on it in a second. Let's go to Geordi and Data with that scene in episode 7, because this is something that my friends and I talk a lot about, because we're old men now. We're not these youngsters like Urza Master. But we go on this trip every year. We've been doing it since 1990. Spicoli was on the first trip up to Baldwin, and then he decided to move out to Beverly Hills, and we continued our trips. So we're going on our for Chris and I, it'll be our 31st trip. But we've been having the conversations the past couple of years, like, and this is going to sound kind of morbid, but there's going to be a year, and I think we've talked about this on the Depth podcast. There's going to be a year where one of us isn't there. We're just at that age now, and I'm feeling them dealing with some of that in that episode, and I kind of like that, just being older now and kind of experiencing that a little bit myself in a sense. So that emotion that you feel as you get older, and you're asking yourself, I'm not a morbid guy, but is this the last time? Is this there's a lot of times I'm thinking to myself, I just want to make it to July so I can go on my trip one more time with my buddies, and I can croak anytime after that. I just got to go one more time, So that's kind of what they bring up here too. So again, excellent writing. Still not sure if I want to see another series beyond this that deals with the crew. We'll have to see what happens in episode 10. And I'll kind of pass it off to Spicoli, who said blunted earlier, with his name being Spicoli. I just have to address that as well.
There's a death podcast. We have to talk about this offline here. This is fascinating to me.
There's not a death podcast. I don't know what we were talking about, but we wound up addressing it in some manner.
Because that would be an interesting week by week. So the other major threads of episode 7.
Well, why don't you subscribe like the other millions of people that subscribe to the Digital Escape podcast? Why don't you be the millions and one?
Just like the monkeys
just
sang.
Click the like button.
A subscriber. I saw your faces. Now I'm a subscriber.
Right.
The other major threads of episode 7, the particular highlights. If we've covered the emotional highlights, let's talk about Vadic and the backstory that they finally reveal, in which she becomes a Starfleet experiment. Manipulated, she and 9 others of her kind. And it's through this, Abu Ghraib of Starfleet that ultimately she ends up escaping her chains, taking on the visage of her tormentor, which is why she looks the way that she looks. And I mean, Gene Roddenberry is probably spinning in his grave, because again, we're given this very sort of sterile look at a Starfleet, that has no compunction about doing these horrible things to another species, all in the name of science or creating new bioweapons or vaccines or whatever their agenda is. It very much does not comport necessarily with the more utopian, mankind has risen past their petty, grievances and sins and flaws, and is out, using the Prime Directive to make the universe, the galaxy, a better place. And so I think we absolutely needed that shading of the character to give it a little more depth and balance. I wish we could have even gone further when we talk about episode 8 and Vadic's ultimate resolution to it. I feel like giving us this information in 7 is powerful enough that I would have liked to see that character even extend further into the narrative, and so forth. Because at the end, if you really step out of your own comfort zone for a second and do it, you kind of see where that anger and wrath is sort of pouring. Now, narratively, of course, she's after Jack Crusher and whatever secrets he possesses, obviously, as the engine. But what drives her, again, what drove Khan to seek vengeance on James Kirk and stuff? It was the death of his wife, the exile of his people. And even though you don't find yourself rooting for Khan, at least, again, you understand that this is a man that will not let that hatred go, the bit between his teeth. And so, like I say, I think Amanda Plummer in this episode, we finally get something beyond cartoonish, something beyond just smoking a cigar on the bridge and cackling with glee and having strange line readings. Like here is something that we have to stop for a second and say, wait a minute, this was, Starfleet created this monster and this splinter faction off of the Great Link, and so really in some ways they were kind of asking for it. And that couples nicely with Picard and Crusher's questions of morality. We are Starfleet officers, we are supposed to follow the Prime Directive and so on and so forth, but this being is threatening our son, and if we cannot choose to sacrifice our son just because of our principles, can we? And so that's a nice dance, moralistically speaking. So I throw it back open to the panel there. sort of touching on both issues. Picard and Crusher wrestling with what it means to live by the code of Starfleet, when we've seen Starfleet is pretty flexible with their code when it came to these particular prisoners of war. So, what do you say, Ursula?
Isn't any? Oh, sorry, I'm jumping in front of you here.
You
Anybody
go
that
ahead.
begins with a U.
You're, but hello. Well, Mr. Spicoli, you'd have to say any country that claims to do good has to wrestle, country or federation, has to wrestle with that eternal question of when does right become wrong?
Right.
Or is it ever wrong? Is it always right? Or is it just right in the eye of the beholder? It's all how you see it, unfortunately. And because Starfleet could say we were just... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I just want to interject that with how we saw was it the Confederation in season 2, which was sort of this cartoonish authoritarian, mirror universe, where, I felt that one was very much on the surface of, oh, this is the bad Starfleet, we have to avoid that. Whereas this one, again, this is all taking place within this reality, this timeline, what have you. And this station, the Daystrom Institute or so forth is, they've got some secrets, right? So it was just a question of how we presented it. We can stand back when they do it in episode 2 and say, oh, those fascists, it'll never get like that. But again, this is not really the same. These are Starfleet personnel, and they had orders, whether it was Section 31 or the scientists or whoever was conducting this thing, burning them with torches and doing all sorts of things there. So yeah, I'm curious how we feel about the not so Roddenberry vision of the future. Going even further.
I think it's more realistic.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's more realistic though too. Again, what are you going to do to get to the what means are you going to do to get to the end in a sense? And they felt that that's what they. And again, we could have this whole right or wrong discussion. We could have a whole series, a new podcast coming to you, philosophical discussion about what's right is why. Why is this right and why is that wrong? So I think that's some of what you're dealing with there, right? Like we had to do this to the changelings, so it was justified. Well, again, is it really according to the Prime Directive? And I'm sure that they wrestle that in DS9, which I started to watch. I'm on episode 3 of season 1 with my wife. We've been watching that. Yes, but the other thing is, I really think it would have behooved them if they would have done the Vadic line or the Vadic story back a couple of episodes. I would have bought into the character more. Let me rephrase that. I would have felt like, yes, I would have bought into the character more if they would have done it a little bit earlier, because she was coming off as this kind of like goofy, bad person that's really being controlled by somebody else, which but she still probably is. But she had that's a great backstory. And they could have done that and you're, Spicoli, you're a way better writer than I am, but they could have probably dropped that in at different points during an episode, or she could have explained it to Picard. They could have done it somehow. Right. But I would have bought into that character, and quite frankly, would have enjoyed the character more as a bad guy if they would have dropped it in earlier.
Right.
I almost didn't like to see her die after that, because I was buying into the bad guyishness, bad person that she had become.
Right.
Urza.
Well, there's a couple of things to unpack there. As far as Vadic goes, I liked that they dropped it then, because it avoids setting up Vadic as some sort of a sympathetic character. Because had you known that she's being controlled remotely by some other force, which I still think is a Pa Wraith, and had you known her backstory, she's being manipulated all over again. Was she a weapon essentially created by Section 31? Yeah, for sure. But you realize that she's not so much being controlled in that her, alliances just line up with her goals. She's not so much being controlled as she is buying into whatever it takes to get her personal revenge. So, yeah, I do think what happened to Vatic and the other changelings in that lab was horrible, but I don't so much feel sympathetic because there are many other opportunities she would have had to essentially be rescued, as they do on TNG all the time and other Star Trek episodes, is they take somebody who seems evil but is just dealing with horrible circumstances and they rehabilitate them. And Vatic was irredeemable. So they had to sort of set it up that way so that things play out. I also don't know that we've necessarily seen the last of Vatic after episode 8, which we'll talk about that conclusion.
Yeah,
but,
I could see that. Yeah.
I think there's other items there we could unpack. But to steer back to Section 31 and the morality discussion, Gene Roddenberry was dead by the time they brought this exact idea up in DS9, because they addressed it pretty much on the nose with Odo. There was a very poignant conversation that Odo has, I think, with Kira and with Sisko about Section 31, and he says to the Starfleet people, he says, "Is this really so surprising that such a large empire has a secret police? The Romulans have the Tal Shiar, and I think he brings up the Klingons have their own, and some other organization has their own." He's like, it makes perfect sense that Starfleet would have something like this. That's what all extremely large governments have. They almost have to. Setting Section 31 up is sort of a necessary evil. And now we've finally seen the depths of exactly how far that evil can go, even though Section 31 was quote-unquote exposed, and sorry, spoiler alert, Lord Uther, but exposed in DS9, but they end up leaning into that. They lean into the fact that Starfleet has this secret police, has this sort of clandestine operation, and it ends up winning them the Dominion War. And the morality at the end of DS9 is ambiguous. I mean, to say the least. This, like I've been saying all along, this season of Picard is not so much a TNG conclusion as it is a wrap-up of the 3 Star Treks of the 90s, 80s and 90s. It's tying everything together. Now, Voyager, DS9, and TNG sort of have a loving successor, and these are all moral questions that, I really applaud Terry Matalas and the writers for bringing them up and bringing that stuff to the light, because that's what I want to know. And Matalas has been in numerous interviews over the last couple of weeks about where he would like to see the series go next. But it's just, it's so true. There's so much more to unpack. And the one thing that bothers me about bringing in these influences like Section 31, and which is a DS9 virtually only operation, and then blending this all together, is it does lend itself to the fan fiction and how people are constructing where they think things are going to go. And I think it's kind of upsetting to be like, there's some really cheap, easy outs here. The biggest one is the Borg. And I know Lord Uther has said if Locutus comes back, he's going to riot. And I think there's some merit to it. And every time I look at it, I kind of cringe. But the idea that the Borg might be kind of key to what's going on with Jack and what was going on with Picard, with these magical powers he's discovered, I don't think it's the case. But there's the fan idea out there, or the fan theory, if you want to say, that somehow the Borg changed Picard's physiology permanently. That was passed down, by heredity, because it reprogrammed his DNA. Dr. Crusher said that on TNG, and it's like a remote connection to the collective. Except this time, the collective is not just the collective; it's everybody. And I get the idea. However, I would point to the red eyes, which I think is a pretty obvious giveaway that this is not so much a connection to the Borg collective or the collective subconscious of all quote-unquote humanity or all humanoids. I think it's the Pa-wraiths, and it's the loose affiliation of these supernatural Bajoran beings, which would make way more sense for a Dominion changeling storyline. And he's essentially, they want him to unite their power. And this brain abnormality, maybe it was taken advantage of by the collective, and that's why Locutus was unique. Maybe that is actually just some unifying force, some new supernatural evolution. But with the right guidance, does it unify the Pa-wraiths? Or does it unify the prophets and bring in the Cisco? I'm going to bring it up every episode from here until Doomsday. I really strongly feel that Benjamin Sisko is going to show his face before the end of this show. Whether it's a Deus Ex Machina or it's just happenstance. I just think I think there's just too good of writing here to have a simple Borg explanation. Now, could the Borg fit? Yes. But I'm with Lord Uther. I think that's a bit of a cop-out. I don't think that's creative.
Thank you.
I think it would be a little cheap. I'm not going to be necessarily disappointed because I love the Borg. They're one of my favorite antagonists. But I think last season we had our Borg resolution. There's not really anything left there to deal with. Unless, again, we bring the Borg that are watching this anomaly back into the fold in the next 2 episodes. For Frontier Day. Is that the anomaly that opens up? I mean, who knows? Or is the anomaly this super Pa-wraith that is controlling these changelings, and then now the prophets have to step in, and it's this god-esque war that only the Cisco could undertake. That's kind of what they're doing in the comics, in a way, and so there's some precedent there, but I think this episode really does a beautiful job of putting everybody in crisis. And that is something that 2-parter episodes did really well. They can come across as filler when they're not specifically labeled Part 1 and Part 2.
Like The Mandalorian.
Like The Mandalorian, thank you. But I just think that even as a standalone episode, this was a successful episode for me. Because it did satisfy a lot of major questions. And it left a lot of cliffhanger-y type moments that I wasn't necessarily disappointed with. They were a little awkward, but, I had the idea that, well, they're probably going to resolve all of this in the next episode because there's only 3 left. It's setting up the dominoes. It's a bit boring, but it really accomplishes a lot in a single episode. And as we'll get to episode 8, we see the fruition of that.
Jack Crusher's like William Wallace. He's going to unite the clans. I mean,
unite us!
Unite us! Unite the clans! Oh, that's fantastic. I like that idea.
Well,
sorry. Go ahead, Spicoli.
We get a lot of Jack in these 2 episodes.
Whoa, hey.
In Dominion, we see him and Sydney luring their attackers into force field traps, and then finding themselves force fielded and having to defend themselves. And then Jack takes the wheel and guides Sydney.
Jack turns into like that. He turns into like that Hugh Jackman character from Real Steel, where he like takes over the body.
He takes over the body.
Takes over Sydney's body.
Has voiceovers like, is he in my mind? Like, can he read my mind? Can he hear me right now?
Which is kind of like that Mel Gibson movie where he could read
What
What
Women Want.
What Women Want. Yes,
It was actually a good movie.
Do you see what's happening here? It's like Mel Gibson and Hugh Jackman have somehow are combining themselves into. It's not even close to that. But I just wanted to say it. Go ahead.
No, that's good. And
Oh,
episode
that's okay,
7,
really. Just take the show, Eric, and run it right off the rails that you're going to bring up Mel Gibson and frickin' Hugh Jackman like that because it has nothing to do with it. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Mel Gibson, America's sweetheart. We do have a lot of Jack Crusher, and it bothered me when 7 was a standalone, and it didn't bother me so much when we got episode 8. Because, again, as Lord Uther has brought out, I mean, 1 week he's got Jason Bourne-like ability to fight off things. The next week he's got glowy red eyes, and he's hearing voices behind the door, and we'll get to all of that in episode 8, Surrender. Again, directed by Deborah Kampmeyer. This one was written by Matt Okimura, and he doesn't have many writing credits. He's a producer, co-producer on the show. He only has the one. He co-wrote the penultimate episode of season 2, Hide and Seek, which basically set Girardi off as the new Borg Queen, and while they were chasing everybody through Chateau Picard. So that's the only other episode that he's written. This was a solo for Matt, and it's paying off. It's Captain Phillips on the Titan. Vadic has captured all of the key personnel on the bridge, including Captain Shaw, 7 of 9, and she's taunting them over the intercom with the 60s sound effects when it goes shipwide communications. People are being picked off in the corridors. They're being locked in chambers. It's all heads are going to roll unless Jack makes it to the bridge. And Jack, building on the power that he showed us in episode 7, he can now literally jump and see, kind of like Game of Thrones, I guess, Bran, the Three Crows. He can actually see through other people's eyes, presumably.
Third eye.
Moving their bodies to do what he wants and so forth. And ultimately tries that maneuver on the one of the crew members of the Titan, almost gets him killed for his troubles. But basically, again, we see the expansion of Jack's mythology without still knowing exactly what it is that we're dealing with here. Just these little teases and suggestions that he's got some otherworldly presence within him, or has always been within him. Picard's remains, which were the theft from Daystrom Station, those remains are found on the Shrike. And there's a moment, well, to go over to the Shrike, we have the Rikers. And I don't know why villains always house the heroes together. It just doubles their ability to escape from any danger in most of these scenarios. But they have husband and wife in the same cell. And they have a nice moment of reconciliation and talking through their pain. Turns out they didn't really like living in the woods. They just assumed the other one was keen for it. But as Counselor Troy says, hey, I love living in the city, Will. So you can bet that any future appearances by her will be, she seems more like now the Samantha of the Next Generation crew. Likes to go shopping and the cosmopolitan lifestyle and all of that. I like the moments between the two. We talked about this earlier this season. I felt that their appearance in season 1, when they were putting on this facade apparently and trying to be brave and cook pizza and be there for their remaining child, apparently it was all a lie. And so they have to talk through some of that. And this is another little storyline. I mean, we got teases of it earlier episodes. It's a nice moment. It's a nice emotional moment. It doesn't quite land for me as strong as it should, only because it feels like this is the only chance we're going to get to really address it. There's so much story to get to and things to still, dominoes to fall, that we don't really have a lot of time to spend on the status of Will and Deanna's marriage. So it feels a little rushed at first glance, but it's a necessary moment, and the two actors with their chemistry play it off especially well. When Commander Worf arrives to break them free, and in one of the funniest exchanges of this season, now that he's found a new Zen calmness in his Klingon being, decides this is the appropriate time to start sharing that, in case you've forgotten, that he and Deanna were a thing. And
I love that, by the way.
Not only the dialogue between
Amazing.
the two expertly, but Jonathan Frakes once again proving that he can do a million things with just a facial expression. And he's going back and forth like a tennis match between these two, and getting riled up at, hey, you're talking to my wife, and et cetera. So just, I mean, those moments, Geordi and Data, or those three right there, lifted out of the narrative for a second. I mean, that's why we're paying $5.95 a month to watch this show. Like this is what fans have been waiting 25 years to see. And so, that's where you lift your cap. I mean, yes, they threw in a bonus Changelings of infiltrated Starfleet storyline, but we want to see Worf and Riker and Troy having an awkward reunion and so forth, and calling on our knowledge of the characters and their relationships. So that was a terrific moment right there. Picard, who's clearly never seen the Avengers or any of those movies where the bad guy wants to get trapped just so they can create havoc later. Let's not forget it was his bright idea to bring them onto the Titan in the first place, but he and Jack and everybody come up with a cool plan to, again, turn the tables, helped by Commander Data, who has to undergo, Brett Spiner gets the big Geordi Data moment now, only he's playing it off against himself, and we'll talk about that moment right now, because this is a 74-year-old actor who looks it now, but with the voice and the body posture and all of that, you still see Data from when we were first introduced to him at Encounter at Farpoint. And, I mean, that's great command as an actor, even with, without the gold, without the de-aging, which they very easily could have done, spent the money and made him look 20 years younger, if so forth. But to see Data in this form, wrestling with, his antagonist, his alter ego Lore, and this is where I will jump off with Ursa Master 2. I mean, this is a moment that has been long in coming, and I think pays off even more than we expected it to in terms of where it all brings us. And unlike, I'd say, the Rikers, where I felt like we got emotional closure, but it felt just a teeny bit rushed, this is a big moment, and it doesn't feel truncated or stepped upon at all. This feels, this is a fantastic moment for Mr. Spiner and for those characters, and I leave Ursa to lead us into that discussion.
I mean, this was the payoff, right? Just like with Q and Picard at the end of season 2, we finally get probably the most incomplete feeling Star Trek character arc ending of all time. Gets its just conclusion right here, and that's Data and Lore. Brilliant antagonist-protagonist relationship. And all signs have pointed to forever that Lore is the stronger of the two, and Lore would be victorious, and it was the TNG crew that basically, exiled him before on numerous occasions, and it felt really real and emotional and heavy. And there was this moment where it's like, I think you always kind of knew Data was going to somehow be okay. And the way it paid off, it wasn't necessarily unpredictable, but it was definitely potent. And that's all it needed to be. It didn't have to be some Deus Ex Machina, because that would have felt cheap. But if it's not that, it's probably something you can kind of predict. And I kind of knew as he was going through his memories, handing them off to Lore, it just felt like, okay, this is how he's going to get him. Somehow. I didn't know exactly how, but the payoff I knew was going to be relatively the same. And I really didn't think they were going to do this to Geordi. I didn't think they were going to kill off Data again in front of Geordi's face. And to see the brothers that way, like Data basically, like two dogs. Data rolls onto his belly for Lore, and then in the end, when Lore's finally realized he's been bested, hoisted by his own petard, if you will, he relents. He gives up and acknowledges Data as the alpha, the goodbye brother moment. Again, an emotional gut punch where you always sort of wanted to see Data and Lore be brothers. You wanted to see them have that resolution. And, I mean, the fact of the matter is they just couldn't do that. Having Brent Spiner play two characters in every episode would be mind-numbing. But he shows, with these performances over the last couple seasons of Picard, that, like, he could do friggin' anything. This guy's a renaissance man of acting. And it's a great foil to the other emotional payoffs we've had. The reunion of Crusher and Picard, those two reconciling sort of their biggest, obstacle. They literally came to shouting match in sickbay. And then you see, of course, the Rikers finally unearthing all of this shit that, I having known parents who've lost children, it's very real what they're going through and how they've basically built up walls around themselves and it's divided them. Even though they put on a nice facade for their dear friend who happened to visit their planet, or they put up a front to each other, effectively lying to each other to make the other one think that they're happy to keep them happy. It's a vicious circle. And as brief as it may be, you got to bear in mind too that she's a counselor. He's been married to a counselor for umpteen million years now. They probably both can process things a little bit faster once real honesty is in the room. And that's something that, like, it's a brief version of what a grieving mother and father who are married might go through in this situation, had they lost a child tragically. And then had to reconcile later after going through similar situations in real world situations. But it does kind of illustrate that it's possible to reconcile. It's possible to overcome. It's not easy. You can definitely tell there's still a lot of work to be done in that relationship. But it does not stop them from getting the job done or contributing to the overall mission. Or essentially, they're getting beyond their mental incapacities to do the right things, help their friends, help the Federation, help people at large. It just goes to show, and I think it's a very unspoken but loud point, that it's like you can't let tragedy or mental anguish or mental incapacity limit you. You have to take it, deal with it, own it, and move forward. And that's what they're doing. They might be doing it, and it's only partially dealt with. There's going to be more to unpack. And I think that's speaking towards mental trauma, which is a brilliant topic for them to bring up, because it fits in with every story arc in this show. But you can still go to work. You can still get things done. You can still be productive. You can still joke. You can still laugh. You can still love. You can still save your relationships by just being honest, putting things out there, and not being afraid to grab the bull by the horns, or rather, grab the Titan by the haunches and lay the pipe. And I think it's a beautiful moment, and I love the Shakespearean balance of bringing in Worf, who just drops this sort of awkward pseudo-romantic line, and it's wonderful. It is so well done. I actually want to go back and watch just that moment. Like, the rest of the episode is better, but that moment alone, like, you know, if this was a half-hour TV episode, would have been worth all the while. You know, this, and it could have been. That could have been one episode as the rescue of Riker and Troy. So I loved both of those things about episode 8. I think the way that they brought everybody back into the mix and into the fold and cleared the ship out, it was great. I loved Vadic came across as just so evil and dark and irredeemable. Again, because I really think the writers had a plan that they want to make a complex villain. They don't want a sympathetic villain. They don't want like just a big bad, you know, Moriarty guy in a top hat, you know, and monocle with a pencil mustache and a cane, meanie bad villain. Like, it's not a cartoon, even though she comes across as cartoony, which her smoking still bothers the fuck out of me. Like, you know, it just, everything about that is just like, oh God, it's just, smoking alone bothers me, but smoking on a TV show in the modern era in space is really like, what?
And putting it
you
out
know,
on
it just blows my mind apart. But it makes her out to be more of a cartoon villain. But they've humanized her, they've given her some sympathy, but they bring that circle back around and they keep her dark, like Captain Janeway's coffee dark. And she just ices people, just like, bam! You got 10 minutes and I'm going to ice another person until you get the fuck up here. And, man, for me, that was a power pack of villainy that I relish in. I really love a good, complex villain. And, of course, we get what I would call almost untimely demise of an arch-villain. You know, through 8 episodes, it's like there's 2 episodes left. This feels like a fairly easy payoff, which is why I don't think we're done with Vadic. She may be frozen and in pieces, but she's still a changeling, and that doesn't necessarily mean that she can't be reformed, unless, of course, she, you know, is blown into some planet's atmosphere and disintegrates. But you know, she's probably survived freezing and boiling before in Section 31's lab. Plus, there's still that hand of hers. You know, is that Deus Ex Machina for her to come back and be supervillain again? I don't know. But I do really enjoy what they did with Seven in this episode. I love what they did with Shaw, yet again being the voice of reason. And sort of the voice of classic Starfleet. To get back to our morality discussion, Section 31, you know, there was a big morality discussion on DS9. There's a huge morality discussion on, you know, Picard now over what do we do? How do we deal with this? Do we just, you know, basically kill these people, you know, or do we try and do the right thing? And yet again, you know, we're sort of faced with that with Seven and Shaw, where it's like, should she have blown the turbo shaft? I mean, no. Not if you're going to do the quote-unquote right thing that's best for the right people. But could it have been the right thing for, you know, the many versus the few or the one? There's that classic Star Trek conundrum, and I loved it. I loved it. I love it, love it, love it. So, yeah, there's just so much about this two-parter, which is not a two-parter that just, oh, man, it was so good.
Did you guys know the bridge could open up like that? That was a surprise to me. I didn't know that they had an airlock.
I think they did that on
Did they?
I think they did that on another episode. I don't know if it was original series or Next Gen or DS9. I thought they did that on another show, but I could be wrong.
Right.
Let me tell you something.
Brother.
If Jean-Luc Picard and Dr. Crusher, first of all, what was that?
Jean-Luc Picard does not lay the pipe.
No. Well, let's think about what Dr. Crusher has done by just having 2 children. She's created a Traveler and Jack. So if Luke Skywalker would show up at some point and just lay down Dr. Crusher, what would they create? Can we even fathom that? Just for a second.
Grogu.
Mark Hamill and Gates McFadden.
I
feel like we should tweet at them and see what they say. Or they should hit us up at digitалescapepod.com.
Well, they're probably... You know what? We definitely have to do that because Dr. Crusher just produces these godlike things from her loins. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty
did you
amazing.
See her in the yoga studio on Next Generation?
Yes, Gary.
No surprise.
Yes, I did. Yes. With that being said, may I bring up one more Star Wars reference? Good, I'll do it anyway. I like how Jack walks in with a thermal detonator.
Yes,
and he's holding the bridge hostage, right? But I mean, it's literally like he pulls back on the thing and it's making the little clicky noises. And it was such a shout out to Star Wars. I just thought that was great. I wonder what his midichlorian count is.
It's off the charts. It's higher than Master Yoda's.
Oh, God.
I love it.
With all that being said, I can't even think now after that line from...
I can't believe you brought it up. I mean, midichlorians, really?
And I want to see Worf have his own series where he's like being Darth Vader-ish and going around and just like the Darth Vader I wanted to see in the trilogy where he's hunting down Jedi, which, by the way, that's a whole nother thing we need to talk about at some point. I thought there were barely any Jedi left. And every time I turn a corner now in Star Wars, there's a Jedi that survived over here. There's a Jedi that survived over there. Oh, Grogu was taken away by Jar Jar Binks. I mean, there are Jedi everywhere. Darth Vader, you didn't do your job. You had one job, and you didn't do it. No excuses.
What, though? If you think about Anakin Skywalker, he's completely ineffectual at everything he does. Everything he does. He doesn't bring balance to the Force.
You know
he
what?
Doesn't make a great villain. He's not a great Jedi. He never became a Jedi Master. He doesn't act well. He has horrible dialogue. He was a terrible child actor and remains so to this day. No, I'm just kidding. In some senses there.
I know we got off the rails a little bit, but all my points are very valid. That's besides the point.
Naturally. Bring us around.
I do think it's very. Now I also think it's ironic that Mr. Hand is running this whole thing. We have Spicoli on the podcast. With that being said, I think now we have the perfect data, which he's done the Pinocchio thing, right? Here he is. Like, we finally got that payoff, which is something I think they had always been kind of building to throughout the series. I mean, they've killed this dude 3 times, and now and every time that they've killed him, it's been okay that he's come back somehow. And now I'm fine with him being here, right, in this form. And he pretty much said it, right? Like, he even said it when he walked into the room, kind of like, this is it. You know, this is the last me, in a sense. So I really like that. And then, yeah, you know, we have them all around the table. We've got, you know, Worf is like a Qui-Gon Jinn type of character where he has all this wisdom, and we've got, you know, a seasoned Riker that's there. We have Picard, who I don't even know how the guy's walking around anymore. He's so old. But we don't care. We don't care because they're together and they acknowledge it that way. And though, again, and I've talked about that a lot over these podcasts, it could have been so cheesy, they wrote it perfectly. Like, there's not an ounce of Parmesan on that anywhere. It was just perfection how they did that. So, you know, again, Jack Crusher having the superpowers, I guess that's going to pay off at some point. But we've got what we wanted. They're back together again.
I do want to point out, because we haven't brought it up yet, and I wanted to beat Spicoli to the punch here, but we get the final cameo of Star Trek Next Generation's greatest character, and that is Spot.
Spot.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Tasha Yar and
Yep.
Spot. If you
Spot.
eagle-eyed viewers, yes. Although they didn't give Tasha any dialogue.
Yes.
But yes. No. I started to tear
Oh yeah,
up.
we saw Tasha Yar as well. Yeah.
I started to tear up with Spot because he said this imperfect being taught me how to love, and the cat's like playing with Brett Spiner, like batting at him and headbutting him and stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is perfect. Even though that's probably the 7th or 8th Spot they've had to use throughout the course of this show. But in
Spot
any
keeps
event,
getting run over by the golf cart on the set. I loved it too. I thought it was beautifully done, and that was the moment I knew that Data had beaten Lore as well. And I think that's sort of when Lore figured it out too, is that he's been bested. He didn't know that Data had it in him, and it made him proud. I think in a way, it was a passing of the torch moment. There's so many of them in this show; it's just unbelievable. But I think the best part about having the crew around the table here is that it does give you a flash moment, and they actually bring it up as like, we don't do enough of this. We haven't done this in a long time. I've missed this. I hate to say it. There ain't no reason to get off the gravy train now. I mean, there's just nothing. We have 2 episodes left, but there's no reason why this exact crew can't be together for another feature film or some other payoff where we get to get one last just TNG crew adventure. Now, however that looks, who knows? But there's definitely plenty of other characters that need a payoff. And yeah, Tasha Yar didn't have any dialogue. You just got that little brief glimpse of her. But it makes you wonder, right? Like, what would she say? Like, oh my God, I'm so sticky. So there's a lot of stuff that could go on here.
Or Denise Crosby.
But I think,
Yeah.
Denise Crosby, she deserves. There's still Selah. Could still have a payoff. So.
She should have had. That should have been a movie, by the way. I'm just saying. She
Yes.
should have been the baddie in one of the movies. It would have been the con to this next generation crew. What are you laughing at over there, Spicoli? You high again? Coming to my class high all the time? What's so funny over there, Spicoli?
What's your problem?
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that idea? Tell me, Mr. Phantom Menace. What's wrong with
I think
that
they
idea?
could still do it.
I
don't just think they could still do it. I think there's a really compelling way they could do it and still loop in a lot of these characters. I think you could do a 4th season of Picard. At this point, I'm convinced that there's enough bones left here with meat on them to do a 4th season, have it be just as quality as this one. And I think what you do is you take season 1 and 2 and you make it unite as a season 3 and 4. Season 4, the next gen crew comes back. Maybe they have an Enterprise, and they're on the inaugural flight of the Enterprise, F, and they're training in Captain Annika Hansen to get her up to speed on the Enterprise. Who else should be there? Tuvok, Admiral Janeway, all these other beloved characters that would be pertinent. I think, personally, I'm going to throw this out there. Miles O'Brien, Dax, the Doctor, Robert Picardo, Chakotay could be out there. You could have this whole host of all of these beloved characters in that season. You could still do 10 episodes and give them each enough of a shakeout that, yeah, you could work in your Voyager revival pilot and kind of backdoor that in like they do with so many other shows. And you could also, kind of weave your way of giving the TNG crew the sunset. And then you have your spin-off series, your Star Trek Legacy, your, future show to be named with Annika Hansen as captain, Star Trek Borg, who knows. And there's so much more space to explore. Not to mention there's intergalactic space. Like, at some point, Star Trek has to go beyond their galaxy. There's still a lot of Delta Quadrant and Gamma Quadrant we have not touched. So there's a lot of territory to cover. And I think at this point, I feel really confident that they could do it. So before we get to our ratings for these 2 episodes of 7 out of 7 Warp Cores, we're going to do one for each, and then as a combined, because I think it's prudent. I want to get your thoughts on where would you feel they are at with spin-off series, and if they decide to do a 4th season Picard.
Go ahead, Spicoli.
Again, I'm gonna wait to see how they want to tie this up before I start clamoring for a 4th season of this particular incarnation. I think Matalas has been very clear that legacy, whatever he thinks that looks like, is more of a catch-all that can incorporate, casts and characters from any part of the universe that he wants to do, including the Shaw and Seven. Like, I don't know that you would do like a Shaw 7 Titan series exclusively with this other things that they're talking about it. I think that this 3rd season has given us, as you say, the launching pad, the opening up of said doors. I think probably more dear to the hearts of fans than what the first 2 seasons of Picard was, with basically some drop-in cameos, a relatively new crew on the Lucerna, and these I think fans appreciated that and enjoyed it, but I think now, having tasted the forbidden fruits of season 3, I think this is going forward. They want to revisit the Berman verse, and they want to use that architecture, that story foundations to expand the universe per se, not necessarily having Picard meeting up with a whole new, but interacting with these characters that we have come to know, and giving those characters we've come to know these deeper shadings, particularly as they've aged and gone through their life experiences. So I'm crossing my fingers. I know that Paramount just announced Starfleet Academy, which is a whole other kettle of fish, where you'll get those hot young, unless, you could have Jack Crusher and Seven, or I guess Seven's already gone through it, but you could have Jack Crusher enroll in Starfleet, and you could have all these other, people. I'm not sure when in the timeline they want to do that. But I would be all for this legacy idea. Like you say, I could spend, I think he said in interviews, like, don't you want to check in on DS9? Don't you want to know what Kira Nerys is up to? And don't you, yes, we do.
He really does. I want to know what Kira's up to.
Exactly. She's married to a Cardassian of all folks, I'm sure.
Will you stop ruining it?
I think this legacy idea. I wake up every morning hoping Paramount is greenlit or is moving forward with that sort of a notion. Ursa Master's giving us enough story just during these podcasts. That's 4 or 5 seasons without blinking. So whatever they don't get to here, I feel like Paramount.
You're the one with the ties, Spicoli.
I was going to say, we start writing. What are you waiting for?
Right. What?
Hell, we are a writer's room.
Let's go.
Come on, Paramount. Give us a call. You can reach us at digitалescapepod.com. Hit the contact us button. Email us. We're happy to be Terry Matalas' brain trust for how they should write episodes. Hell, you don't even have to pay us all that much. We'd be happy with a cool $250,000 a year.
Gold Press Latinum. Yeah, we'd be fine with that.
Yeah, Gold Press Latinum. You just give me Nana Visitor and just Nana Visitor. I'll be happy. I'm just kidding. No offense, Nana Visitor. You're a brilliantly talented actress. I'm not trying to be some sort of a lech. But, let's be honest. There's a lot of appeal there in many ways.
Indeed.
I'm worried because I don't want. We don't want to overshoot it here. Is kind of what I'm getting at. If it's going to end on a good note, let's end it, and let's not ruin it. We had the discussion about, would you have been okay with season 1 being the end of it? And I said no. Would you be okay with that? And I said no this season 2. I'm perfectly fine with it ending this way, depending on what happens, obviously, in the next 2 episodes. But my prediction is it's going to end great because the first 8 have been fantastic.
Brilliant.
So I don't want to see them overextend themselves, and we're going Mandalore Mandalorian season 3, episode 6, with Jack Black walking around and doing all this stuff,
And Lizzo.
and you could have cut 40 minutes out of that episode.
Oh, dude.
I mean, okay, sorry, we'll
Yeah.
say that for another podcast.
Another podcast.
Yeah, so that's my concern. The legacy thing, I feel like the legacy thing and the Starfleet Academy thing was brought up like 15 or 20 years ago anyway, and they've kind of bring it up again. And I remember the original pitch for Starfleet Academy was 90210 in space. Don't do it.
that.
Don't. You don't want to do that.
Maybe
right?
Buffy the Vampire Slayer in space.
I just, you got such a great thing going with Strange New Worlds. It's so wonderful, and you've done a really nice job here. If you want to do the legacy thing where you're doing 2 or 3 episodes with the Voyager and 2 or 3 episodes with DS9, or I like Urza Master's idea. Again, love all these characters, love the 80s, 90s, and 2000s and 20, whatever we're at now. But let's close the door. Let's do what Next Gen did. Let's jump ahead 150 or 200 years, and let's start something new. I would be okay with that, or I would be okay with or just having the Titan. And I never thought I would say that. I thought I would want to see another Enterprise show, but maybe the Titan is the buffer for 2, 3, 4 years before you go with a new, next generation or something like that. But I would be okay with this coming to an end. I think it's the proper ending, because I don't know what the hell you do after this. Because Urza, I love your. I know you got ideas, and I love your, getting everyone together and everything. I get that thought process. I just don't. I don't know. I mean, obviously you do, which is why they need to call you. I don't know how you do that without. They've done such a great job of keeping the cheese off of the season. I don't want to see no cheese.
I think, and this is going to be controversial, I think you got to do a little ham and cheese, and you gotta go back to the root of what works for Star Trek. And this is my pitch for any show that they do that's longer than 10 episodes or longer than a single season or a miniseries. You have to go back to weekly, episodic, standalone stories that do build towards an overall arc, but aren't always necessarily tied to that story.
Yeah.
I know for whatever reason they want to shit can anything that's ever been done on TV before so they can do something new and brilliant, but there are 50 stupid singing shows on TV. There's 700 types of Law and Order. There's 40 different cop shows that aren't Law and Order. There's reality shows and they all suck. I'm sorry, but if you can do all that crap, you can revive Cheers and you can revive Star Trek. You can do those exact same shows, same format, which is new characters and new stories. You can still address political issues, cultural issues, like anything that Roddenberry ever did before, and do it artfully, and do it tactfully, and do it just well enough that it feels unique to space and Star Trek. But I digress. And now, we have gone where no Warp Core podcast has gone before. For episodes 7 and 8 of Season 3 of Picard, this is our ratings. Episode 7 standalone, Episode 8 standalone, and the two-parter, as we've dubbed it, rating. We're going to do 3 ratings apiece. Rate Episode 7 if it were on its own, Episode 8 on its own, and both of them together, because I think it's prudent. It's the way this show happened to hash out, so we're just going to do it because I said so. We're going to kick this one off with Lord Uther, because I am dying to hear what he has to say.
6 out of 7 for 7. 7 out of 7. Wait. No. Yeah. 6 out of 7 for 7. 7 out of 7 for 8. 7 out of 7 overall. Um, I, I just, man, guys, we continue to say it. We're just seeing some gosh darn great writing. It's what we wanted with Nemesis. This is what we wanted, in my opinion. So that's all I have to say about that. Okay, Spicoli.
All right. In typical Jeff Spicoli fashion, episode 7 gets 5 7/8 with my initial misgivings. Episode 8 is a solid 7. And when you add all that together, I don't know what you get, but I'm going to give the two-part as a whole continuum. That should get a 7 because it's a nice, tense hostage drama, right? I mean, when you really think about it, this could have been a next-gen episode. They've taken over the ship, and they're going to start killing crew members, and unless they, so it fits that hold nicely and gives us a lot of moments along the way. The destruction of the Shrike, the reuniting of key characters, the emotional beats. So, taken in tandem, I would say it is a classic, solid 7 there for both of them.
Wonderful. And I'm going to be in the same boat as you guys, basically. 6 out of 7 for episode 7 on its own, 7 out of 7 for 8. I think we should always treat this as a two-parter, and those that don't should. 7 out of 7. I mean, I think of the 7 warp cores, nothing could deserve it more so far. You get some of the best emotional writing, you get some of the most unique circumstances, and you do get a very classic Trek episode feel. If this was a season-to-season two-parter, this would be probably the best. I mean, there are very few that I can think. Time's Arrow maybe is better, but it's truly wonderful. I just thought of something. Boy. All right.
Do it.
Come along with me on this journey, if you will. My ratings stand. But if the Cisco is not our Deus Ex Machina, episode 10 rolls around. Things have somehow resolved. They've beat whatever big bad was out there. They've conquered Jack's illness. They're resolving everything. Everybody's going home happy. Somebody's laying the pipe. Probably multiple people. And they're all kind of wondering. It seemed really convenient that we just happened to defeat this big bad all of a sudden. Almost like there was somebody who just snapped their fingers and made it happen. In walks Q's son from Star Trek Voyager. And he says, I was getting a little bored with this. And that's the end. Okay.
Wow.
I had to throw that in there because it popped in my brain, and
That's
for whatever
interesting.
reason I'm getting goofy. But I do think that's one of those loose ends they never really tied up. And that if they do a Voyager revival series, I fully expect to see Q2 on there. So with that, friends, Romans, Romulans, thank you for coming along with us on this journey of the Warp Core podcast through episodes 7 and 8 of Star Trek Picard. Thank you to Terry Matalis and all of the writers, because I think, again, we could gush and gush and gush about the brilliant, brilliant writing we keep seeing every week. I very much look forward to episode 9 with you fellas next week. I'm sure we'll be chatting about it and pish-poshing around what we think's going to happen or not going to happen, who we may or may not see for guest stars. I don't think we're done with guest stars at this point. I think there's going to be 3 or 4 big ones yet. The Cisco. And with that, as always, live long and prosper.